and welcome to Relationships in Astrology, and this is our series on love and the planets, and we're looking at the transits from January 23rd to January 29th, and I'm Margaret in Dublin.
And I'm Armand Diaz in New York.
So what do you think of this week ahead of us, Armand?
Well, if I had to use one word to describe it, I would say serious. It looks to me like a serious week. It's a week where we're having the new moon, which we'll talk about in a separate video. I don't want to give away any secrets. But the week of the new moon tends to be kind of a little subdued, a little bit more inward time. So I think it's a little quieter. But there's some serious stuff happening this week.
There is some serious stuff, and it also feels it's kind of a strange week because it feels like there's a certain tone in it up to about Friday, and then Friday it suddenly shifts quite a bit. So it's like the first part of the week, you know, there's the moon in Sagittarius, so there's kind of that urge for freedom and so on. And there's also, I think with all this Pisces energy around, there's still that dreaminess that's around, yet the other planets are trying to kind of help us to make it into form. But Pisces, all this water is kind of slippery and slidey and emotional. So I think there's still a lot of emotions that are floating around. And it's not easy to figure out, I think, for anybody in a relationship, are they about the relationship, or are they about, you know, of course, each individual in the relationship, or are they about the collective at large, or what's really going on? So I think it's hard enough for us as individuals, but then if it comes to relationships, is how do we isolate that?
I agree. And, you know, it is the Sagittarius moon on Monday. We have this sort of upbeat Sagittarian energy, and we have Mercury is going to sextile Neptune. And that seems like some, you know, some dreaminess, a little bit of fogginess in communication, but maybe in a kind of nice way, you know, sort of soft focus. Maybe we can talk about stuff. So it sort of starts with one vibe, and then it kind of changes. The moon goes into Capricorn on Tuesday, and that Capricorn is a serious sign, and we get very close to the new moon.
Yes, it's more of a contained feeling about it, really. I think more private. I think whenever the moon goes into Capricorn, there's more a sense of a few more barriers go up, a few more protection. So it's more contained. The one thing I will say, about the moon in Capricorn is that it can also be very good for laughing at ourselves. So I think, you know, if we can shift into kind of seeing the funny side of things, that might kind of help a little bit. And of course, Venus is conjunct Chiron. So there's still a lot, it feels like a lot of healing around relationship issues, which of course is great in the long term. Actually, it can feel a little ouchy, a little painful when the issues come up to be looked at.
It's certainly the sort of thing that, you know, when you look back on it in another month or a year, you may say, well, that was actually a good experience to have gone through. But when you're doing it, it probably doesn't feel like that at all. I think Venus conjunct Chiron is liable to be pretty difficult, and especially in Pisces, where, you know, I mean, a Venus Chiron aspect is going to be about bringing things up and healing them. In Pisces, though, you know, things can be quite magnified, and, you know, it can really, it's great for seeing things and opening up all the more, but, you know, perhaps almost too much.
Yes, I agree. And then on Wednesday, the moon in Capricorn is conjunct Mercury. So I think that's a very interesting time, because there could be some serious thinking and some serious talking, you know, about what's really going on and being practical, kind of being earthy and practical. So a day maybe of introspection, a day about, you know, talking about what's going on in the relationship, how do we feel about it. So, and generally, not always, of course, just with partnerships, but even with family dynamics or friends or colleagues. So I think that will be quite a good day for solid communication.
And then Thursday comes around, and on Thursday we have the Capricorn moon squaring Uranus-Pluto. It's something we were pretty used to it at this point in time, but it's an irritability. It's a kind of, you know, where are we with things? Give me my space type of feel to it. That is, you know, it's not a big deal. We're used to it, but we should, you know, be aware that sometimes that. Even if you're used to irritability, you're still irritable. Even if you need your space every couple of weeks or every week when the moon is in a cardinal sign, you still need your space.
Indeed. And I think, you know, I think part of it is also that we've had so many intense transits over the past few weeks that I think there's a part of people, you know, that are tired. You know, there's a tiredness around as well. And, you know, a lot of people have been saying to me, when are things going to lighten up? When are things going to change? And it's hard to really pinpoint that because we're still in the midst of all these, the mixture of the Pisces energies and the mixture of, the Sag energies and so on. So in the Capricorn, so it's not really quite the time yet, just to let people know. It's not that we're holding out on you, it just isn't quite the time. So on Thursday then, of course, we've got Venus quincunxing Jupiter. So still that clash between dreams and romance, and something, more equal. But then on Friday, I think that's quite a very interesting day. What are your initial thoughts about Friday?
Well, Friday is the day of the new moon, and that's a time of endings and beginnings. It's a time when we seed things. And what happens? Venus squares Saturn. And here we have Venus in Pisces, this sort of romantic, giving, compassionate energy, and then Saturn in Sagittarius, our beliefs, and they're kind of at a bit of a clash with each other. But Venus-Saturn aspects, often in relationships, they often feel like times when we make decisions, when we feel like we're going to take things to the next level, or maybe it's time to sort of step back a bit. It can go either way, but it usually a sense of decision is what's called for. And at a new moon, a decision might stick.
Yes, and the interesting thing is, of course, that Mars also moves into Aries later that day, depending which time zone you're in. So that brings in a whole different flavor, because Mars in Aries, of course, can be quite bolshy. It's like, I want this and I want it now, and this is how I want it. So it's very feisty, very individualistic, very freedom-loving, wanting an adventure, getting bored easily. So I think that's where the energies really kind of shift quite dramatically.
Very much so. And before they shift, Mars is at 29 degrees of Pisces, where he's also kind of at an extreme. And that can be this kind of, I'm giving it all up type of energy. Mars at the very last degree of Pisces, it's a fairly strong energy in and of itself. Well, the directedness of Mars in Aries is probably, it'll feel a little easier to deal with, perhaps, as a sort of sense of like, jamming on the accelerator, but letting go of the wheel that Mars at the last degree of Pisces might be.
Well, it's probably less emotional, isn't it? I think maybe the energies might get a little less emotional, that we're not swimming in all those confused feelings and emotions. And Saturday is, of course, the start of the Chinese New Year. And I don't know anything, I have to admit, about Chinese astrology, but all I do know is that it's the year of the fire rooster that we're going in. And apparently I read that the last year of the fire rooster was 1957. So I think it might be interesting, to think back, and even if you weren't alive at that time, but just to think back of what was going on maybe within the family matrix or the collective at that time, just to get a sense of what the energies might feel like. And then, of course, we've got Sunday, and we've got Mercury conjunct Pluto. So talk about a serious day. I mean, that's really a day to kind of talk about, what's going on in the relationship, one of those kind of serious talks. So fairly intense day, very much back to authenticity being absolutely crucial. It's a day to be honest. And of course, and the moon goes into Pisces. And I think it's interesting with the moon in Pisces, because, moon in Pisces doesn't always want to look at what's going on in reality. It really would rather kind of times be a little evasive, avoid reality. And yet the romance that the moon in Pisces craves so much, of course, can't be obtained without dealing with reality, and without dealing with accountability, and without dealing with commitment, which are all things which don't sit so much with the moon in Pisces. So I think that's going to be interesting, the clash between, having a serious conversation and yet wanting to just go off into la la land.
It's a weekend that I feel it's after the new moon, but it's just after the new moon. So there's really not that much energy. The moon is technically waxing, but until you can see it in the sky a couple of days after the new moon, you don't really have that sense of sort of waking up. And just about the point that we get there, the Aquarius moon is usually pretty good for socializing and getting out. This weekend, it's a little early. And then just about the time that the moon starts really waking up, it's in Pisces, and it's sort of time to go back to sleep a little bit. So yeah, I think there may be a little bit of fogginess on the weekend.
It's really hard to get away from this very deep Pisces energy, or very floaty Pisces energy. We still seem to come back to it time and time again, that mix of kind of having these times for very serious conversations and then all these emotions floating around. So, of course, Pisces energy is great for being creative. So, anything creative is kind of nice to do really together. And, if anybody has, Pisces sun or moon, then these are very important times that are going on really for you at the moment. And similarly, of course, with Capricorn and Sag as well.
Yeah, I think that is something to keep in mind. We've been saying it a lot lately, but it's a good reminder. Creative things are a great outlet for these energies. You don't always need to necessarily pour everything into the partnership. And I think, with Mars now in Aries and all that Piscean energy around, I think that maybe something that can sort of push you forward a little bit in a different area might be quite appealing and might be quite constructive.
Yes, and not forgetting to have some fun. Mars in Aries likes to have fun. So also to be a little playful, particularly when there's so many serious other energies around. So have a good week, everyone, and we will be back again the following week for the transits for love and the planets. Thanks, Armand. Bye-bye.
Bye, Margaret.